Okay, so I thought kind of how I can link my research with my lab research with the work that we do in COST. And I'm known for working on disgust. So most of the work I do is about this relationship between disgust and sexual arousal and disgust. And first I'm going to show you where I come from and where I live now, just to give you some context. And this is kind of where I did my studies. Oh, this is going automatically. Huh? Wait, no. How do I go back? No, don't do that. Okay, so, okay, stay there. So these are where I did my studies. And in the left side, there is where I live now. And on the right side, there is where my favorite spot in Malta. So for a future meeting, I think that's a nice place. Just some promotion here. Yeah, I think I can help with that. Okay, so I thought we can link, now I'm going to talk about lab studies. So it's quite reductionistic approach after we heard these amazing talks about a global approach, about looking out of the box and going more at a macro level. So now I'm afraid, now I'm going to go very narrow and to a reductionist approach. So sorry for that, but I hope you can find it still interesting. So children of pre-puberty age have this disgust response towards sexual stimuli, right? Like they say, ooh, yucky, they are kissing, or they are repulsed by it. And this should not come to us as a surprise, because at the core of human sexual interactions, the core stimuli are very disgusting. If you think about sweat, semen, the body fluid, the smells, they are very disgusting. To come in contact with these stimuli, you need to have some judgment impairment at that moment in time. So actually, the children are in the right state of mind here. So something happens between pre-puberty and later on in life, post-puberty, where there is this shift between a disgust response to sexual willingness to come in contact with these same highly disgusting stimuli. And there are a lot of papers that looked into this and why could be the case. And we now see that sexual arousal is the culprit. So probably what we now see that it is sexual arousal, but we don't know the cause of it. I would like to have money to study this, to look if it's coinciding with the increase in testosterone that happens in both men and women, and boys and girls, to see whether the sexual arousal is driving this willingness to come in contact with the same disgusting stimuli. And coming in contact, prolonged contact, is the only way we can unlearn disgust. We also know this from a number of conditioning studies on it. Okay, so our hypothesis was that probably the disgust response that we see in women with vaginismus and dyspareunia, what is now being called the GPPD, the genital pelvic pain penetration disorder, could be this disgust that we all seem to have by default, but that it was not unlearned. There was not the relevant exposure, or perhaps because of our implicit attitudes we have towards sex. Perhaps anal sex is, for example, one idea that I had in mind now, might be repulsive for you. And for that person, that might be eliciting disgust rather than sexual arousal. So the space of sexual arousal will be very limited. And we tested, I'm saying that we see this disgust response in women with vaginismus and dyspareunia. We tested this with fMRI studies, but also with EMG, measuring the facial levator here, which is a unique physiological marker of disgust. So kind of this is why we started thinking about the emotion of disgust. And what is disgust? Very brief, I'm going to just mention it because I think I'm always talking about disgust. I don't want to be that's the association with me, yeah? Charmaine Disgust. So disgust evolves a defensive mechanism to protect us against three adaptive problems: what to eat, what to touch, and whom to have sex with. If you do not have disgust, we probably wouldn't be here, because you would be eating all kinds of toxic things, you will be touching contaminating stuff, and you will be having sex with all people that will not lead to a healthy pool of genes. And the disgust has a unique physiological response, and that's what we measure when we use the EMG, these unique physiological markers. The eyebrows are pulled, and how you can see it on the picture there. Okay, I think this is what you need to know. And disgust also increases a function of proximity. So you can look at these pictures of tomatoes, and it is very disgusting. But if I had to tell you, okay, focus on the one with the green circle, and imagine you have to grab it with your thumb and your finger and bring it closer to your mouth, so you feel the texture, it's a bit watery, it's very disgusting. You have to put it closer to your mouth and have a bite from it. The disgust, exactly. So you see this physiological response. The closer it is, especially when you have to incorporate part of this, the disgust response increases. And this is the same for women that see, for example, the penis as a very highly aversive, disgusting stimulus. Then you expect this physiological general response to such stimulus. And I'm saying the penis now because that's what I had in mind. Okay, that did not make sense at all. And sexual activity is a massive risk for contamination. So here I want to convince you that sex is risky and is disgusting. And the study from the Netherlands actually found that just mouth-to-mouth kiss, it has the 5 seconds mouth-to-mouth kiss, has the exposure of 8 million bacteria. Of course, not all bacteria is negative, some bacteria is healthy, but that's just to show you the exposure that we have. And imagine how it is more exposing and more disgusting than if you have more bodily fluid contamination. So, but are sexual stimuli really disgusting? And we did an fMRI study where we looked at different categories of pictures, including when you do fMRI work, you need to also control for example, the color in the picture or the texture, how easily it is to recognize that stimulus. And we had genital hardcore sexual stimulation. We did not aim to sexually arouse the woman that we had. So we only had genital pictures, removing all facial expressions, etc. So genital pictures, body just to control, and then disgusting bodily information. And what we could see is that when we did specific analysis to see the similarities between disgust and hardcore sexual stimuli, in the core part of the brain, in the primal part of the brain, there were a lot of similarities. This similarity was not so for example, fear stimulation and the hardcore pornography, which is interesting because as a reviewer you can say, oh, but it's probably just negative stimulation. It can be fear, but this was not the case for fear. We also controlled for fear. So it has something to do with the disgust component. In retrospect, we thought it could be that the woman felt contaminated because imagine, these were in the scanner, bombarded with these negative pictures of fear, disgust, and penetration pictures. So we primed them in a negative way, so to say. We were not aiming to sexually arouse them. But then again, if it is true that sexual stimuli for sexually asymptomatic women are so disgusting, then why do we have sex? It's kind of contradictory, isn't it? And we tested this model here where we did a number of experimental studies to look how disgust weakened sexual arousal and how sexual arousal weakened disgust. So in this study that I'm going to show very briefly, we looked at the impact of sexual arousal on disgust. And this is important, what I'm going to say, I believe. Of course, I'm biased because it is my work. But if you if it's true that if we increase sexual arousal, we're weakening this disgust by default that we seem to have, for clinical interventions is very important. If we can find a way how to upregulate sexual arousal, to minimize disgust, or even to overwrite these negative, ambiguous feelings we might have for sexual stimuli or specific sexual stimuli, then we're giving science something very important, I guess. And we did a very fun study where we had 90 women that were sexually asymptomatic, and we sexually aroused them. We generally aroused them, like just with general arousal, sports, activity with no sexual connotation, and with a neutral mood. And we gave them 16 tasks. It was a highly controlled study. I'm not going into the details of the methodology, but every person was exposed to two tasks, and then 2 minutes video, 2 tasks, 2 minutes video, etc. To keep sexual arousal constant, and not to have a dip in sexual arousal, because otherwise you will impact the willingness then. And what we could see, these were some of the disgusting tasks that they had. They had to touch, for example, a bowl with condoms and coconut milk smelling a bit fishy, and they had to put their finger in it and roll it. So they were extremely disgusting. And what we could see is we have the red bar, which is sex-related tasks, and the blue bar, non-sex-related tasks. We had two different tasks. For both groups, for the sexually arousal group, they were more willing to do these disgusting tasks than the general arousal, and also from the neutral group. Which makes sense, right? It's not only for sex-related stimuli. So if you're going to have sex with your partner in the bedroom, but there are smelly socks, for example, that will still have an impact, though it's not sex-related, but the negative non-sex-related stimulus will have an impact on your generation and maintenance of the sexual arousal. It will be distracting, at least, at minimum, for the generation of sexual arousal. And this takes me to the study that I actually wanted to talk to you about, because that was more kind of an introduction. How can we kill genital arousal? And one might think, killing genital sexual arousal, who would want to do that? So this, I must say, it was not my idea. It was an idea that came from a startup company with Philips, that they tried to come with a measure, with a product that can help women or men, but this was particularly for women, that have difficulty to avoid being sexually violated. And in the beginning, this person read my previous studies, the one that I just mentioned, and he was interested to look at the other side of the coin. And we brainstormed a lot together, and we thought, okay, we can use smell, like aversive smell, to try to see whether we can indeed kill genital arousal. And if there is no genital arousal, if there is no erection, of course, there can be still rape with other methods, but there is less risk of it. We're minimizing the risk. And this aversive smell that we worked with, it is so potent, so strong, that we diluted it in the ratio of 1 with 100,000, and still, because of course it depends if it's with the size of the room, how volatile is the smell, etc., etc. We still had this effect that I'm going to show you. And it's kind of, yeah, I will tell you. I'm now moving more forward than my slides. Okay, so now we're looking at this side of the relationship, the impact of disgust on arousal. And we had this study where we had men in different groups, a group of men that were induced with this highly aversive smell. We had a group of men which was induced with just neutral smell. And also to come up with neutral smell is not an easy venture. And we had on a factometer, it's called, where with very small pipes, they were in the nostrils of these people. And we had genital measurements. We had also, let me show you here, I don't know why I put a picture of a woman there. She's a student of mine, but they were only men in the study. So I had the electromyography to measure the level of disgust and the level of negative emotions. So we measured the corrugator muscle here and the levator muscle to know if it is really producing this negative response. And we had the penile circumference measurement. And that, again, it was really complex because to ask the men to select the right penile circumference measurement, you cannot just say small, medium, and large, because no one will go for the small and no one will go for the large, so you have a problem. So we had to do a lot of thinking how to best, even something so small, we had to think a lot about it. And then we measured sexual arousal this way. And we first provided them with a comedy, just to put them at ease, because imagine, they had pipes in their nostrils, they had the penile measurements, they had facial measurements. It was very labby, kind of. It was really not an easy experiment. So we first put them at ease with this comedy, and then we had the pornography part. And then when they were already with so I had the control, the experimental group, and the PCR. There we can see that in both the conditions, the genital sexual arousal was increasing, as you expect, and only then, you see those little green bars, we started inducing, giving these negative aversive smells, aversive puffs. And so it was after the generation of sexual arousal, because I believe it's very different from distracting from degeneration, and then when it's already sexually aroused and you kill it. It's kind of more difficult, the second option, right? So I wanted to be sure that this is what it's doing. And indeed it worked, that in people with the aversive smell, even if it was diluted 1 to 100,000, as I said, because of ethical purposes, we couldn't use the neat smell. We could see that the genital and subjective, but we care more about the genital arousal because it's more an objective measure, it decreased drastically. So we managed to kill genital sexual arousal. And this is the bracelet. I have nothing to do with the marketing of this bracelet, but it's a very good project, I think. It's being used in Africa, it's being used in various countries where there is a fial with the neat smell in it, and with one click, the smell goes out. And now there are a lot of studies being done about the confidence that such a bracelet is giving to these women, that even just wearing it, it gives them some level of protection. So now there's some social studies at this level as well. And as I said, and Patricia, I'm still doing well in time? Yes. Oh, look at me today, I'm impressed. And as I thought, I think it's also relevant from these studies, though they look a bit perhaps too experimental or very reductionist approach because they are lab studies, we should not forget that they have clear clinical implications with them. So we're working now on this transition. Like, for example, we're doing conditioning studies where we find ways, what are the most efficient manners to unlearn disgust, because disgust, in a difference with fear, a lot of work is being done on fear, but disgust is quite neglected still. It's very hard to unlearn, because fear, if you have a dog running towards you, I always give this example, but someone puts the dog on leash, the boundaries of the threat are so clear. It's very obvious. The dog is now not fearful anymore. But if you have disgust because it is blind to the naked eye, you really cannot tell if I'm convinced that I'm going to get corona if I talk from this mic. No one can convince me that this is not going to happen. So we're trying to do a number of conditioning studies to see what is the best manner to unlearn disgust, and we find that the prolonged exposure and providing safety information is the only efficient way to unlearn disgust. And also including, there is something, an insect going around me all the time. No, don't bite me. And now we're also doing interventions with emotion regulation and down-regulating disgust, for example, or other aversive emotions, and up-regulating sexual arousal, which is again, quite a complicated but efficient manner to increase the space for sexual arousal. And that's it from me. I think this is the first presentation I did it in time. I never managed this, so I'm impressed.